Hello! It's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with a new series. So we are going to be covering the potential path to victory for the Conservatives, and if you kind of invert the color scheme, it would also be the path to majority for the Liberals. But I'm not going to focus as much on that here, because it'll be slightly different coloring schemes. It's kind of hard to represent both on the same map. If people really want a path to victory for the Liberals, once I've done this series, I could just re-release the map on Twitter with the color scheme inverted to properly capture it. But for this purposes, we're only really going to consider the Liberals and the Conservatives. I might add the bloc when I get into Quebec. We'll see. I'm not going to cover every single riding in one video. This will take too long. So we're going to do it by related subregions. Today we're going to be covering the GTA, which for purposes of this video, I'm referring to Toronto Metro here, Durham, and Oakville-Burlington, Milton right here. Now, just a note on the color scheme. So for the Conservatives, the dark blue here, which under core, this is areas, the darker the blue, basically, the more it's mandatory they win this. In other words, for example, Fort McMurray right here is going to be the darkest core blue. There is no path to victory for the Conservatives in their current iteration with the current leadership, with the current platforms, where they do not win Fort McMurray. It won't happen. They can't win a majority if they don't do that. It won't be the same party. You can't even call them the same party if they aren't doing that. Conversely, the darker red this is, the more likely they physically cannot win the riding. And in all intents and purposes, the Liberals should win it. And you will see some of them. So basically, this core red, there is no conceivable scenario in my mind where the current iteration of the Conservative Party could win this riding, barring the total collapse of the Liberal Party like 2011. These lighter colors here mean it's a light blue. The Conservatives should win this in a majority, but it's not strictly speaking necessary, whereas these lighter reds mean they likely won't win this in a majority, but they could conceivably win it without the collapse of the Liberal Party. And the general gist of this is, if I'm doing this correctly, I suspect some blues they won't win, or some of the very light blues they won't win, but they will win some of the light reds. Because you don't always win all of your target ridings, and sometimes you win ridings you aren't targeting because of quirks of politics. But with that, let us begin. So this is all based off of deep dived statistics and riding histories that I have compiled, which means that we're likely only going to be seeing one update a month or so, because it takes a good amount of time, not wildly the amount of time, but enough time that I can't do much faster, assuming I continue the rest of the videos I'm doing, which I plan on. So we'll start here. So the reason why I'm starting with the GTA is this is pulling off of the video I did on the 18th of December, where it was one of the core points of the video was the GTA is a trap for the Conservatives. You'll see pundits, you'll see even conservative analysts, pollsters, everyone say that the GTA must be fought over. They need to win a large portion of it. And the reason why people say this is they're looking at something like 2011, when the Conservatives won their last majority, and they swept the GTA, basically. The reason why I think this is silly is because 2011 is an anomaly. Not only did the Conservatives do unprecedentedly well in the GTA, in not only just vote share, but in raw votes. It's the highest raw votes they've had in 30 years there, and every single election since then they've been declining. But they also had a disproportionately high vote share because left-wing voter turnout decreased. As you can see here, we have simplified left-right. This isn't perfect, because if you just take the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens and combine them, you will not get the sum of the small parts. In other words, you won't naively add the vote share and get that vote share. And we can actually see that in practice here, because these early ones are the combinations of the PC and the Reform Party. And as you can see here, 1993 and 1997, the separate PCs and Reform outperformed the 2004 combined performance. Subsequent years, the combined party does better, but that's a combination of increased voter turnout. As you can see here in 2006, there's significantly more voters showing up, and there's significantly more, and the party starts rebounding a bit. If we look in percentages where turnout is no longer considered, or total turnout isn't considered, you can see 1993, 97, and 2000, the percent vote is higher than it is until 2008 on the combined party, and it's higher than it's been since 2015. So there's really only been 3 years where the turnout for the Conservatives in the GTA approached the two separate parties. So you can't naively combine them. But for the sake of the analysis we have here, because it's the closest thing. So we can see here, if we naively combined, the average of the last 30 years is about 65% vote left-wing and 35% vote right-wing. Now, you break it down by ridings, and some are much more competitive than others, but it really goes to show that this isn't a very competitive region for the Conservatives. There really is no logical reason why they should win this, except for situations like 2011, or lesser extent 2008, where you have weak leaders like Stéphane Dion and Michael Ignatieff in the Liberals, and a very strong leader, Jack Layton, on the NDP, especially in 2011, causing a lot of vote splitting. And Dion and Ignatieff depressed Liberal vote share quite significantly. You can see in 2008 and 2011, they got under their 1990 or their 2000 performance and under 100,000 votes, whereas every other election in the last 20 years, they've gotten above about 100,000 votes, and in actually recent years, they're closer to about 140,000 votes. So these two leaders heavily depressed Liberal vote, and a lot of them went to the NDP as well, as you can see here with 2011 with a very high turnout for the NDP. So there's really the idea that the Conservatives can win a lot of ridings here, really not possible. But we're going to break it down into some subregions here, and I'll try not to go too slow on this, but also not try to go too fast so people can follow. If you think I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know in future videos, or in the comments below so I can correct for future videos. Oops. So we're going to start off here with Toronto proper. So I've divided the GTA into, I think, 8 subregions, roughly based off of the subsidies, but not necessarily exactly, because it's not that important. I'm just grouping the ridings based on their similarity. Often that means it's the same subsidy, but not necessarily. So in Toronto proper, what do we see? Well, the Liberals do really well. In fact, the NDP generally does better than the Conservatives, and you can see here in the percentages very easily, but 47% Liberal, 29% NDP, 18% Conservative. The Conservatives get butchered here, and you aggregate it to simplified left-right, it's 82 to 18. There really is no conceivable scenario where Toronto proper goes Conservative. And if you look at the provincial party, which a lot of people do point to, because Doug Ford does well in Toronto, even in Toronto proper, the provincial Conservative Party, with a moderate leader and a much more moderate platform, physically can't win these ridings. He's not won any of them. The NDP solidly won all of them in Toronto proper, or what I'm calling Toronto proper. So the idea that the federal Conservatives could win any of those ridings is silly. They can't. They're not winnable. It would be like the same analogous as saying that if the Liberals want a majority government, they need to win Fort McMurray. Yes, if they could, that would be great for them, but they can't. It's not something they could possibly do. In the current iteration of the Liberal Party, the current iteration of the Conservatives, it's just not a thing. There's no path. So next here, we have York. York is a bit interesting because there's a few parts of York region, which is these 4 ridings here, which are somewhat competitive, and there's some that are not at all competitive. But even the ones that are somewhat competitive are not very competitive. You can see here, 55% Liberal, 26% Conservative, 13% NDP. Though this betrays something because the Conservative vote share is actually much more concentrated than it looks, it's still not very high, though it is going up over recent years. It's one of the only regions of the GTA where the current iteration of the party, post-Harper, is actually outperforming the 2 distinct parties in the 90s. As you can see here, the post-Harper time frame versus pre-90s time frame, they're not outperforming. They're about on par in Toronto proper. But in York, they're actually outperforming it. So it is one area where the Conservatives are actually gaining some growth, and the provincial Conservative Party actually does relatively well in York. I believe, let me just pull up this map on my other screen. They actually win 3 of the 4 ridings, and Humber River Black Creek was extremely close. And actually was sort of an upset win for the NDP. No one really expected them to win that one. It was not impossible, but it wasn't expected, if you will. So the story with York here is a slightly different one. So we have 2 ridings. This is for the federal party, keep in mind. We're not talking about the provincial one. Some of the ridings are completely uncompetitive, and one of them is very competitive, and one is somewhat. Eagleton-Lawrence is conceivable. If you look at 2011, it was won by the Harper government. The other 2 haven't ever been won by the Conservatives, as far as I'm aware, federally, in the last 30 years. And that's a pretty good statement because I've looked at all the results. Unless I'm missing one or misremembered one. They haven't won either of those ridings in the last 30 years. The current performance of them is quite poor. Whereas the other 2, they have, in the past, won them. And they, specifically, York Centre is relatively competitive. It's very conceivable that a majority government could win it, but it doesn't seem like it's necessary. In other words, I can see paths to victory that do not include York Centre, but York Centre would be helpful, if we will. And it's conceivable. So moving from York, we get Don Valley. Don Valley area is just to the right of York. Unlike, well, similar-ish to York, but slightly different. The Conservatives do relatively well in Don Valley region. The problem is their vote distribution is really flat here. Whereas York, you'll see like York Southwestern or Humber River Black Creek, the Conservatives do really poorly, and then Eagleton, Lawrence, York Centre, they do quite well. Don Valley, it's relatively flat. So, well, on paper, it's a lot closer, 34 to 53 versus 55 to 26. Because of the vote distribution, it's very unlikely they could win any of them. Not impossible, but very unlikely. And even though when you bring it down into left-right averages, it looks a lot closer, but in reality, because of vote distribution, it's not very close at all. So we get something like this for Don Valley. It is more conceivable than downtown Toronto, but because of vote distributions, I don't see the Conservatives pulling out a win there, barring the collapse of the Liberal Party. Moving on into our next sub-region here, we get down to Mississauga. Mississauga was a very similar story to Don Valley. On paper, it looks fairly competitive, only 51 to 36. That's a pretty close distance. The NDP doesn't really do much vote splitting here, so it's kind of low. The only time it really mattered was 2011, which again, doesn't really matter because weak Liberal, strong NDP, so it's kind of irrelevant. And if we break down into simplified left-right here, we have, again, relatively looks on paper competitive, 63-37. The problem comes in a very similar manner to Don Valley, there isn't really any spots of Mississauga where the Conservatives have concentrated vote share. They have relatively flat across the entire region, but there's not really any place where they have particular strength. The closest one might be Mississauga Lakeshore, but even that isn't particularly competitive. So there really isn't a meaningful path to victory here for the Conservatives. It doesn't seem very likely that they could win most of Mississauga or any of Mississauga in their current iteration. It's not inconceivable. They definitely could do it. It's more likely than downtown Toronto, which they've never won. They have won Mississauga before. It's just exceedingly unlikely. There is no conceivable path I can see with the current party winning that without a collapse of the Liberals, because the only time they've won Mississauga is with the collapse of the Liberals, and I just realized I picked the wrong color here. I meant to pick this one. Boop, 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 boop. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. That's what I meant to do. There is no path to the Conservatives winning in the Mississauga without a collapse of the Liberals. It's not impossible, but it requires the Liberals to fold. Brampton is almost to the T the same story. It's a little bit more competitive because we're talking about a much larger NDP vote split among the left-right, even though there's actually slightly more left-wing voters in Brampton than there is in Mississauga by about 2 points. The fact that the Liberals have less concentration of that vote share means it's more possible for the Conservatives to come up the center, possibly win some of these ridings. Again, it's really flat distribution for the Conservatives. They have really no concentration of strength here, so it seems exceedingly unlikely that they could even do anything with this numbers. But it's a little bit more plausible than core Mississauga, but really not that much. It almost is the circumstance that you would need the Liberals to collapse for the Conservatives to sweep Brampton. But I will note, like Mississauga, possibly like Don Valley, it's very likely that if the Conservatives were to win one, they might win all of it. So if the odds of the Conservative winning one riding in Brampton, but not all five, extremely rare. They're extremely unlikely. Same thing with Mississauga, same thing with Don Valley. But winning any of them seems exceedingly unlikely with the current iteration of the party and the current trends in the GTA, which is increased urbanization, increased density. These things tend to make people less conservative, especially as you're talking about renters without kids. I can't give you the exact details why. I might go into a different video, but it seems having kids and home ownership tend to make people more conservative, so the decline of those two things also makes these areas even less likely to be won in the future. Going into Oakville-Burlington area, and Milton, if we want to, I'm including that in this sub-region, we actually get to the first region where the Conservatives in a majority really should actually be winning most, if not all, of the ridings here. Again, we'll see in a second when I do the coloring scheme. Just because they're leading it doesn't mean they should win all of it. What you can see in raw numbers, the actual average vote share is higher for the Conservatives than it is for the Liberals in Oakville-Burlington. Raw number of votes, same deal. You look at averages, it's 55 to 45, and that's including a healthy NDP Green Party vote split. So it is very likely a Conservative majority campaign could win all of Oakville-Burlington. It's not guaranteed, but it seems plausible to me that any path to victory for the Conservatives federally does come with sweeping most of Oakville-Burlington, the only exception being Milton, just because the local candidate in Milton, for reasons I can't quite put a name to, seems to be very strong. He wildly outperforms all of his peers in this region, even though On paper, the demographics of Milton look more favorable to the Conservatives than the rest of Oakville-Burlington. Maybe someone from the area or someone more context might be able to help explain that to me in the comments. I know Vancouverden is a former Olympic athlete, but that on paper to me doesn't really seem to be enough reason for him to be such a strong candidate. Maybe there's something about him. If you know, let me know. Moving on to the next sub-area, we have Markham-Aurora. This is the main area for the Conservatives to look at getting pickups. In fact, I would argue that this is the main area they should be focused at winning. On paper, unlike Oakville-Burlington, it's a little less competitive. They're actually 10 points behind the Liberals. But what this portrays is actually really inefficient Liberal voting in this subregion, with two of the ridings, Markham-Thornhill and Markham-Stouffville, being extremely strong Liberal areas, and the rest of them being relatively mildly Liberal. Mildly enough that a Conservative majority campaign should be able to win a bunch of ridings here. Again, like Oakville, this lightest blue color, that doesn't mean they should win every riding here, but they should be winning some of them, if not most of them. And if we break down left to right, again, 61-39, again, on paper, not great compared to Oakville-Burlington, but because of actual favorable voter efficiency here, it does lead to the advantage for the Liberal, or for the Conservatives. So we get a couple of distinct subparts here. So we have Thornhill, which is almost uncompetitive right now. Markham-Stouffville, pronunciation, a little competitive. It's not inconceivable, but it's very similar to Brampton in position. And we get the rest of this, where it is much more similar to this. Now, some of these are possibly bluer just because of favorable incumbents, but we're looking at a situation like this, where a Conservative majority government pretty much can't lose King Vaughan and Thornhill, especially right now. If they lose Thornhill, something wildly bad has happened. Whereas the other ones like New Markham-Aurora, Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond, Markham-Unionville, and Vaughan-Woodbridge are all very competitive, and a Conservative majority should have enough vote share that they should be able to win them. But again, it's not guaranteed. They could lose some of those ridings. Just like how they could win York Centre, or they could win Milton, they could lose some of these. They could lose, say, Newmarket-Aurora. Especially if we're getting a situation very similar to 2021, where the Conservative-leaning Chinese voters don't turn out. Now, there's lots of allegations for why they didn't turn out, but there's a lot of data showing that some of the allegations being that the Chinese pressured them or whatever, or the anti-China policies by Aaron O'Toole scared them. What it looks like happened is they didn't switch Liberal, they just didn't vote. So that is a possible risk there, but if they do vote, the Conservative-leading Chinese population should cause a win there in a majority scenario. It's not like, we're not talking about ridings like, again, Fort McMurray, that the Conservatives will always win, but we're talking about ones that they are edged towards if they're winning a majority government. And that's the important caveat here. If they're going to win a majority government, these are ones they need to win. If you are watching on election day and they're losing these ridings, they're probably not going to win a majority. They're losing all of them, I should say. They need to win most of them. I haven't actually done the exact math, so I don't know how much wiggle room they have, but you want to presume they want to win as much as they can, basically. Going into Etobicoke, though, we have a very similar situation to the rest of the core GTA, which I'm really defining as Etobicoke to Scarborough, or core Toronto, possibly. Well, it's not Toronto. You know what I mean. The provincial party does quite well here. Ford is literally from Etobicoke. It actually runs in Etobicoke North, I think. But Ford isn't the federal party. His provincial platform is very different. His governance style is very different. His personality is very different. And he's literally from there. Whereas Poilievre's not from Toronto. He's not anything like Ford, personality-wise, and his platform is very different. So it's very similar to Don Valley or Scarborough. It's conceivable. They have one riding is in Etobicoke before, but to me it seems very unlikely that they would win ridings here. In fact, I would even go so far as to say I don't see them winning them without the collapse of the Liberals like 2011. Though, in 2011, when the Liberals did collapse, they did take Etobicoke Lakeshore and Etobicoke Centre. So it has happened. It is possible. It just seems extremely unlikely to me to repeat that success. Trudeau as the helm, I don't see him losing these ridings. Moving into Scarborough, we have very similar story. We break down here, left, right, 71-29. Liberals very strong. NDP do somewhat good, but not anywhere close enough to cause any meaningful vote split. And if you look on an election by election basis, they're actually trending upwards, the Liberals, and the Conservatives are trending downwards. I don't guarantee that that is a trend that will hold, but it is a local trend to consider, and it is a trend that we should expect because, again, Scarborough is becoming more dense, becoming more urban. It was already dense and urban, but it's becoming more so, especially as people push for more and more densification in cities. And, again, people with children are decreasing, parents with children are decreasing in Toronto proper, or in the GTA, I should say, and renting is increasing. Both of those things tend to make people less conservative. Again, future video might talk about why that might be the case, but that does seem to evidently be the case. It's actually such a degree here that even in 2011, the Conservatives only popped out a few ridings in the GTA. In Scarborough. They only got 2 of 6 Scarborough ridings at the time when the Liberals collapsed. So to me, most of this is just impossible. But not entirely. So I will be coloring it somewhat like this. The 2 that have been off-colored a little bit, they did win in 2011, so it is conceivable they could win them again. It has happened before, but it's the color I'm using here, this one, which means that they have won the riding before, but only when the Liberals collapsed. And we're looking at it like this. And if you look at demographics and trends in the region, that might be generous too. It might be closer to unwinnable than it is to winnable if the Liberals collapse. Even in a Liberal collapse scenario, they might not be able to win it. You look at provincial party in the provincial elections, yes, the provincial Conservatives do win much of Scarborough, but they don't win all of Scarborough. That's the thing. And that's with a very... Because keep in mind too, when a lot of people talk about the provincial Conservative Party in Ontario winning lots of places in the GTA, they are forgetting they have an extremely favorable vote split. Right now, they're getting about 40% of the vote, and the NDP and the Liberals are each getting about 25% of the vote. Possibly, we could say maybe closer to 30% each, but there's other smaller parties getting vote share too. So they are actually the minority party, or there's more left-wing voters in the GTA, even provincially. It's just you have a very favorable vote split going on. And that's not happening federally, especially because Singh seems to be quite weak and Trudeau dominates urban areas. Maybe that will change, and if we see Singh somehow pull a Jack Layton ability out of his behind. This could theoretically happen, but right now it's almost impossible. It would require the Liberals collapsing effectively, or Singh to be suddenly an amazing politician. And to wrap up here, we have Durham-Oshawa-Pickering area. This is another area where the Conservatives do well in, and you would expect them to win most, if not all of it, in a majority government. Look here, they got 42% of the vote to 38% for the Liberals. The NDP are present and actually are doing enough to cause a lot of spoiling here. You look over here, it's 57-43 in left-right aggregate. And the People's Party actually does quite well here. And it does quite well without really hurting NDP or Conservative vote share too significantly. And every time the Conservatives have done well in overall vote, they've done well here. So it's very likely that they would win a lot of this area. And this is one of the parts of the GTA they really should focus at. But that said, there is some parts of it that are different than others. For example, we go over here to Durham. It's not inconceivable that they could lose Durham, but it seems extremely unlikely. Right now, with a relatively long-term incumbent who's done quite well in Oshawa proper, it seems unlikely to lose Oshawa. Other parts, though, Whitby, they seem like they should win Whitby. I'm using the wrong color here for that. Whitby and Pickering, apologies, should be wins for the Conservatives in a majority government, but Ajax seems very unlikely. Very strong Liberal support there. Conservatives' concentration is a lot lower, so it doesn't seem particularly likely. But that's kind of what we're seeing here. So right now, the Conservatives have 4 seats in the GTA. Durham, Oshawa, Thornhill, and King Vaughan, sorry. In a majority government scenario, there's 10 ridings that they could conceivably win. Or they should conceivably win. And maybe you could say 12 if you count the pink ones. But a lot of places are not competitive. And we're talking about, in the best case scenario, right now, the Conservatives have 119 seats. Best case likely scenario here. Likely case scenario? Anyways, is let's say they get the 2 pink, so we get a 12-seat pickup. That's still only 133 or 131. That's not a majority government. These places matter. The Conservatives should campaign in them. But we're not talking about places like Mississauga Lakeshore, which is why the by-election there is a bit of a nothing burger. People making a big deal out of it. It's not a target riding for the Conservatives. It's not an indicative riding where they should really do well in. They've only won it once in memory. I might be slightly wrong there, but I don't think so. I only recall them winning it once. Yes, the Provincial Party does well there, but the Provincial Party isn't the Federal Party. But here we have the base. These are the target ridings, and again, the darker blue they are, the more they should be targeted, the darker red, the less. These are the ridings where the Conservatives have their path to victory in Toronto. There should be competition there, but some parts there shouldn't be. They can't be won. But with that, I'll bid you adieu. I'll wrap this up all here. If you like the video, let me know in the comments below. If you disagree with anything, also let me know in the comments below. I will be likely updating this once a month, give or take, so keep your eyes up for that. I will not necessarily be covering the same number of seats every time. It really depends on subregions because some places are easier to cover than others. For example, rural Alberta and Saskatchewan is like one subregion. That's probably like 20 ridings, 30 ridings. Because it's very unlikely. Actually, you could throw rural Manitoba and rural BC into that too. The rural Western Canada is a given, pretty much. I'll probably do that next time or something. I don't know. But maybe I'll do that last just because it's least interesting. Let me know what subregions you want to see first. Pardon me about that. Sorry. Let me know what subregions you want to see next, or what areas you want to see next, and I can prioritize those. But otherwise, I will be doing this the way arbitrarily. No rhyme or reason to this. But with that, I once again bid you adieu, and I will see you later this month with more videos. At least one more in the Understanding Politics series, and maybe some map updates, but it depends.